The August sun blazed mercilessly over the Calgary Stampede grounds, casting long shadows across the rodeo arena where thousands of spectators had gathered for what would become the most unforgettable day in Canadian rodeo history. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of popcorn and dust, and the distant sound of country music echoing from the main stage. In the competitors' area, veteran cowboys adjusted their gear with practiced precision, their weathered hands checking straps and buckles one final time. Among them stood Jake Morrison, a 67-year-old legend whose name was whispered with reverence throughout the Canadian rodeo circuit. His silver hair caught the afternoon light as he leaned against the wooden fence, his piercing blue eyes focused on something beyond the crowd's excitement. Jake wasn't there to compete anymore. Those days had ended 5 years ago after a near-fatal accident that left him with a permanent limp and a titanium rod in his left leg. But rodeo was in his blood, flowing through his veins like the Saskatchewan River flows through the prairie. He couldn't stay away, even if he could no longer climb onto the back of a 2,000-pound beast. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for our final event of the day, bull riding. We've saved the most dangerous for last, and today we have some of the fiercest bulls in all of North America." A collective cheer erupted from the crowd, but Jake felt something different in the air. Call it intuition, call it the wisdom that comes from decades of reading animals, but something was off. The bulls in the holding pens seemed more agitated than usual, their massive bodies shifting restlessly, their eyes wilder than he'd ever seen. Behind the chutes, the featured bull of the evening waited. They called him Thunder Mountain, a 1,800-pound black Brahma cross with a reputation that preceded him across 3 provinces. His horns curved menacingly from his massive skull, and scars from countless battles marked his hide like war paint. Thunder Mountain had never been successfully ridden for the full 8 seconds. Never. The first few riders came and went, some lasting mere seconds before being thrown into the dirt, others managing a respectable ride before the inevitable dismount. The crowd roared with each performance, but Jake's attention remained fixed on Thunder Mountain. The bull's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, his breathing heavy and labored. When young Tyler Henderson, barely 19 and full of the reckless courage that only youth provides, climbed onto Thunder Mountain's back, Jake felt his stomach tighten. The kid had talent, but something about this particular moment felt wrong. Desperately wrong. The gate swung open with a metallic clang that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Thunder Mountain exploded from the chute like a force of nature unleashed, his powerful hindquarters launching skyward with violent fury. Tyler held on admirably for 5 seconds, then 6, then 7, the crowd counting in unison as the 8-second mark approached. But Thunder Mountain had other plans. With a savage twist that defied the laws of physics, the massive bull threw Tyler clear across the arena. The young rider hit the ground hard, too hard, and didn't get up. As the rodeo clowns rushed to distract Thunder Mountain, something snapped in the bull's mind. Instead of following the established pattern of being herded back to the holding area, Thunder Mountain turned toward the crowd. His eyes, now completely wild with adrenaline and rage, fixed on the barrier separating him from 8,000 spectators. With a bellow that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, Thunder Mountain charged. The wooden barrier, designed to contain bulls, splintered like matchsticks under his assault. Screams erupted from the crowd as people scrambled over each other, parents grabbing children, couples separating in the chaos. Thunder Mountain was loose, and he was heading directly into the heart of the panic. In that moment of absolute terror, as security guards fumbled for their tranquilizer guns and mounted riders struggled to get their horses under control, Jake Morrison did something that would be talked about for generations. He stepped forward, not toward safety, not toward the exit like everyone else, but directly into Thunder Mountain's path. His weathered hands hung loose at his sides, his body language completely relaxed despite the approaching storm of muscle and fury. The crowd's screams seemed to fade into silence as man and beast locked eyes across 30 yards of churned earth. This was not bravery. This was something deeper, something that connected to the very soul of what it meant to understand these magnificent, dangerous creatures. Jake had spent 40 years learning to speak their language, and now, in this moment of ultimate crisis, he was about to have the most important conversation of his life. Thunder Mountain slowed, confusion replacing rage in his dark eyes. Something about the old man standing calmly in his path didn't compute with the bull's fight-or-flight instincts. Here was a human who wasn't running, wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening. Here was stillness in the midst of chaos. The arena fell silent, except for the sound of Thunder Mountain's heavy breathing and the distant wail of approaching ambulances. 8,000 people held their breath as two legends faced each other under the unforgiving Canadian sun. What happened next would challenge everything anyone thought they knew about the relationship between man and beast, between fear and respect, between chaos and the profound peace that can exist in the eye of the storm. Time seemed suspended in amber as Jake Morrison stood motionless in the center of the Calgary Stampede arena, facing down 1,800 pounds of pure rage and confusion. Thunder Mountain's massive chest heaved with each breath, steam rising from his nostrils in the late afternoon heat. The bull's eyes, wild moments before, now showed something different. Curiosity, perhaps even recognition of something familiar in the old man's steady gaze. Jake's mind drifted back 43 years to another arena, another bull, another moment that had defined his entire life. He was 24 then, young and invincible, riding a bull named Tornado Alley in Medicine Hat, Alberta. That bull had the same look in his eyes, not evil, not malicious, just misunderstood and afraid beneath all that power and fury. "Easy, big fella," Jake whispered, his voice so low that even the nearest spectators couldn't hear him. But Thunder Mountain heard. The bull's ears twitched forward, a subtle sign that Jake recognized immediately. It was the same gesture Tornado Alley had made all those decades ago, just before everything changed. Thunder Mountain took a tentative step forward, then another. The crowd held its collective breath as the massive animal approached the motionless man. Jake could see the confusion in the bull's eyes. This human wasn't behaving like the others. There was no fear radiating from him, no aggressive energy, no sudden movements that might trigger a charge. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Emergency responders had surrounded the arena, tranquilizer guns trained on Thunder Mountain from multiple angles. Dr. Sarah Chen, the rodeo's head veterinarian, spoke urgently into her radio. "Hold your fire until my signal. That bull isn't in attack mode anymore. He's investigating." Jake's wife, Martha, had passed away 3 years ago, and he'd thought his days of meaningful connection were over. She used to say he had a gift, a way of communicating with animals that went beyond anything she'd ever seen. "You speak their language," she'd tell him after watching him calm a spooked horse or settle an agitated bull. "It's not magic, Jake. It's respect." Thunder Mountain was now just 15 feet away, close enough that Jake could see the intelligence behind those dark eyes. The bull had stopped advancing but hadn't retreated either. They were in a standoff, two old warriors evaluating each other across species lines. The silence was broken by a weak voice from behind the medical barrier. "Jake, is that you?" Tyler Henderson, the young rider who'd been thrown, was conscious but barely mobile. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. But his eyes were clear, and they were focused on Jake with something approaching awe. "Stay still, son," Jake called softly, not taking his eyes off Thunder Mountain. "Everything's going to be fine." But Thunder Mountain heard Tyler's voice and turned slightly toward the sound. The bull's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of blood, and for a moment, the wild look returned to his eyes. Jake recognized the signs immediately. The bull was remembering why he was angry, why he had broken free in the first place. "No, boy," Jake said, his voice still calm, but carrying a note of authority that seemed to cut through the bull's confusion. "That's not who you're mad at." Thunder Mountain's head swiveled back toward Jake, and something extraordinary happened. The bull lowered his massive head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. It was a gesture Jake had seen before, long ago when he'd spent 3 months rehabilitating Tornado Alley after that bull had been injured in a truck accident during transport. The memory flooded back with crystal clarity. Tornado Alley had been written off by everyone, deemed too dangerous to handle after the trauma of the crash had made him unpredictably aggressive. But Jake had seen something in that bull's eyes. Not malice, but pain. Physical pain that had healed, emotional pain that hadn't. He'd spent hours with Tornado Alley, not trying to dominate or control, but simply being present. Sitting outside his pen, talking to him in low tones, letting the bull decide when and how to engage. It had taken 2 months before Tornado Alley had approached the fence voluntarily. Another month before, he'd allowed Jake to touch his muzzle through the rails. Thunder Mountain took another step closer, and Jake could smell the earthy scent of the bull's hide, mixed with sweat and adrenaline. The crowd was so quiet now that individual heartbeats seemed audible. Even the emergency responders had lowered their weapons slightly, mesmerized by the impossible scene unfolding before them. "I know what happened to you," Jake whispered. His words meant only for Thunder Mountain. "Someone hurt you, didn't they? Maybe not today, maybe not yesterday, but someone made you afraid to trust." As if responding to Jake's words, Thunder Mountain's eyes softened. The bull's breathing slowed, and the rigid tension in his massive frame began to ease. Jake had seen this transformation before, the moment when an animal realizes that not all humans are threats, that some understand the language of patience and respect. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the arena, and in that golden light, something magical was happening. Thunder Mountain lowered his head further, bringing his massive skull down to Jake's eye level. For a moment that seemed to last forever, man and beast regarded each other with mutual recognition. Jake slowly, carefully, raised his weathered hand toward Thunder Mountain's muzzle. The crowd gasped, but the bull didn't flinch. Instead, he extended his head slightly, allowing the old cowboy to touch the soft skin between his nostrils. "There you are," Jake murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "There's the real you, underneath all that fear and anger." Dr. Chen watched through her binoculars, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. "This shouldn't be possible," she whispered to her assistant. "Bulls don't form instant bonds with humans. They don't demonstrate this level of social cognition with strangers." But Jake Morrison wasn't a stranger to Thunder Mountain's kind. He was something far more rare, a human who had learned to see beyond the surface, to recognize the soul that existed within every living creature, no matter how frightening or misunderstood they might appear to others. As the connection deepened between the old cowboy and the magnificent bull, spectators began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Some pulled out their phones to record the moment, but most simply watched in stunned silence, sensing that they were in the presence of something sacred. Thunder Mountain's transformation was complete now. The rage was gone, replaced by a calm curiosity that reminded Jake of a puppy discovering the world for the first time. The bull's tail, which had been lashing with fury just minutes before, now swayed gently from side to side. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the silent arena, "I'd like you to meet Thunder Mountain. Not the monster you thought you knew, but the magnificent creature he really is." The arena erupted in applause, but it wasn't the wild cheering of earlier. This was something deeper: recognition, respect, and awe for what they had just witnessed. Thunder Mountain's ears flicked at the sound, but he remained calm, apparently content to stay close to the human who had seen his true nature. If this incredible story of connection and understanding has moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories that will restore your faith in the power of compassion and respect between all living beings. The connection between Jake Morrison and Thunder Mountain deepened as the minutes passed, but what the crowd couldn't see was the storm of recognition brewing in Jake's weathered eyes. As his hand remained gently pressed against the bull's muzzle, feeling the warm breath against his palm, memories began flooding back with painful clarity. Thunder Mountain wasn't just any bull. Jake had seen those distinctive white markings before: a crescent-shaped patch above the left eye and 3 small white spots along the right flank. These weren't random patterns. They were as unique as fingerprints, and Jake had memorized them years ago when this bull was just a calf. Dr. Chen approached cautiously from behind, her footsteps deliberately audible so as not to startle either man or beast. "Jake," she whispered, "we need to get Thunder Mountain back to the holding area. The longer this goes on, the more unpredictable the situation becomes." But Jake shook his head slowly, never breaking eye contact with the bull. "Sarah, do you have Thunder Mountain's breeding records with you?" "What?" "Jake, this isn't the time for—" "Please!" Jake's voice carried an urgency that made Dr. Chen reach for her tablet immediately. "I need to know where he came from, who bred him, when he was born." As Dr. Chen scrolled through the digital records, her face grew pale. Born April 15th, 2018, at Morrison Ranch, Alberta. Sire, Tornado Alley. Dam, Prairie Rose. She looked up at Jake with dawning comprehension. Morrison Ranch. That's your family's operation, isn't it? Jake's eyes filled with unshed tears as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Thunder Mountain, he whispered to the bull. You're Tornado's son. Your family. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. 5 years ago, when he'd been forced to sell the ranch after his accident, he'd lost track of many of the animals he'd raised. The financial pressure from medical bills and his inability to work had made it impossible to keep the operation running. He'd tried to place his bulls with reputable breeders, but the paperwork had been overwhelming, and in his grief over losing everything, he hadn't followed up as closely as he should have. Thunder Mountain, then just a young bull named Mountain, had been one of the last to be sold. Jake remembered him as a spirited but gentle calf who had followed him around the pasture like a giant puppy. Mountain had been Tornado Alley's pride and joy, inheriting his father's intelligence but showing none of the trauma-induced aggression that had initially made Tornado so difficult to handle. What happened to you, boy? Jake murmured, his hand moving to stroke the bull's massive neck. Where have you been all these years? Dr. Chen continued reading from the tablet, her voice growing more troubled with each detail. He's been through 4 different owners since leaving your ranch. The last 2... Jake, there are incident reports here. Abuse allegations that were never prosecuted due to lack of evidence. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Thunder Mountain's aggressive reputation, his inability to trust handlers, his explosive reactions to confined spaces, these weren't natural traits inherited from his father. They were learned responses to trauma, defense mechanisms developed over years of mistreatment. Thunder Mountain seemed to sense Jake's emotional turmoil and pressed his massive head closer, a gesture of comfort that nearly broke the old cowboy's heart. Here was this magnificent creature, offering solace to the human who had failed to protect him, who had let him slip away into a world of pain and exploitation. I'm sorry, Jake whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm so sorry I let you down. The crowd, unaware of the personal drama unfolding, watched in continued amazement as the bond between man and bull seemed to strengthen rather than weaken. What they were witnessing wasn't just an extraordinary moment of human-animal connection. It was a reunion, a homecoming that had taken 5 years to achieve. Tyler Henderson, still being treated by paramedics behind the barrier, had managed to overhear enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. That's your bull, isn't it? He called out weakly. That's why he stopped. He remembers you. Jake nodded, unable to speak as emotions overwhelmed him. Thunder Mountain turned slightly at the sound of Tyler's voice, but instead of the aggressive posture he'd shown earlier, the bull's body language was now protective, almost paternal. He positioned himself between Tyler and any potential threats, as if claiming responsibility for the young rider's welfare. Dr. Chen was still scrolling through the records, and what she found next made her gasp audibly. Jake, according to this, Thunder Mountain was scheduled to be euthanized next week. His current owner filed paperwork citing him as unmanageably dangerous and unsuitable for breeding or competition. The words hit Jake like a sledgehammer. In 7 days, this magnificent animal, Tornado Alley's son, a piece of Jake's own heart, would have been destroyed, written off as a failure when in reality he was a victim. The thought of Thunder Mountain dying alone, still carrying the scars of his trauma, was unbearable. Not anymore, Jake said with quiet determination. That's not happening. Thunder Mountain seemed to understand the conversation on some instinctive level. His massive body relaxed further, and for the first time since the chaos had begun, he lowered himself slightly, adopting a resting position while remaining alert. It was a gesture of trust that spoke volumes. He felt safe with Jake, safer than he'd felt in years. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting the arena in golden hues that made the scene appear almost ethereal. Photographers from local news stations had arrived and were capturing images that would soon travel around the world, but they couldn't capture the true essence of what was happening: the healing of old wounds, the restoration of a broken bond, the moment when love conquered fear. Margaret Calhoun, the head of the Calgary Stampede committee, approached cautiously. "Jake, we need to discuss what happens next. We can't keep the arena closed indefinitely, and there are safety protocols we have to follow." Jake looked up at her, his hand still resting on Thunder Mountain's neck. "Margaret, I want to buy him. Whatever his current owner is asking, I'll pay it." "Jake, you don't have a ranch anymore. Where would you keep him?" "I'll figure that out," Jake replied with the same determination that had made him a legend in the rodeo world. "I failed him once. I won't fail him again." Thunder Mountain lifted his head and looked directly at Jake, and in that moment, both man and bull seemed to understand that everything was about to change. The reunion was just the beginning. Now came the hard work of rebuilding trust, of healing wounds that went far deeper than anything visible on the surface. As the sun continued to set over Calgary, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jake Morrison and Thunder Mountain stood together in the center of the arena, two old souls who had found their way back to each other against impossible odds. The crowd remained silent, sensing that they were witnessing something sacred, something that transcended the boundaries between species and spoke to the deepest truths about loyalty, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living beings. The real miracle wasn't that Jake had calmed a dangerous bull. The real miracle was that love had survived 5 years of separation, abuse, and heartbreak, emerging stronger than ever in the moment when it was needed most. 3 months later, the morning mist hung low over the rolling hills of Okotoks, Alberta, where Jake Morrison had purchased a modest 20-acre property with his life savings and a loan from the bank that had once foreclosed on his original ranch. It wasn't much compared to what he'd lost, but it was enough. It was home. Thunder Mountain stood in the center of the pasture, no longer the rage-filled beast who had terrorized the Calgary Stampede, but a magnificent creature at peace with himself and his world. His coat gleamed in the early sunlight, and his eyes held the calm intelligence that Jake remembered from his father, Tornado Alley. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first weeks had been a delicate dance of trust-building, with Jake spending hours simply sitting in the pasture, letting Thunder Mountain approach on his own terms. There had been setbacks, moments when old traumas surfaced and the bull would retreat into defensive aggression. But Jake had patience earned through decades of experience and powered by love that refused to give up. Sarah Chen visited regularly, initially for veterinary checkups, but increasingly just to witness the remarkable bond that continued to strengthen between man and bull. She documented the entire rehabilitation process, and her research was already changing how animal behaviorists understood trauma recovery in large animals. "It's unprecedented," she told Jake during one of her visits. "The neuroplasticity we're seeing, the ability to overcome deeply ingrained fear responses, it's rewriting everything we thought we knew about bovine psychology." But Jake knew it wasn't psychology that had saved Thunder Mountain. It was something simpler and more profound, the recognition that every living being deserves a second chance, that love can heal wounds that seem too deep to mend, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquering but from understanding. Tyler Henderson had become a regular visitor to the small ranch. His arm had healed perfectly, and he'd returned to competition, but something fundamental had changed in how he approached bull riding. The young cowboy spoke differently about the animals now, with a respect that went beyond their physical power to encompass their emotional complexity. "Thunder Mountain taught me something that day," Tyler explained to a journalist who had come to write a follow-up story. "These aren't just bucking machines. They're individuals with their own stories, their own pain, their own capacity for connection. Jake showed me that the best cowboys aren't the ones who can dominate a bull. They're the ones who can understand them." The media attention had been overwhelming at first. The video of Jake's initial encounter with Thunder Mountain had gone viral worldwide, spawning countless articles about animal psychology, human empathy, and the mysterious bonds that can form between species. But Jake had quickly grown tired of the spotlight, preferring the quiet work of rebuilding his life and helping Thunder Mountain heal. On this particular morning, as Jake approached the pasture with Thunder Mountain's favorite treat, apple slices dipped in molasses, he reflected on how much both their lives had changed. The bull heard his footsteps and turned, letting out a low, welcoming rumble that was nothing like the terrifying bellow that had once sent crowds fleeing in panic. "Morning, big guy," Jake said, extending his hand with the apple slices. Thunder Mountain approached without hesitation, his massive head lowering to accept the treats with surprising gentleness. As the bull chewed contentedly, Jake scratched behind his ears, marveling at how trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. The financial sacrifice had been enormous. Jake's modest pension barely covered the property payments and Thunder Mountain's care, but neighboring ranchers had rallied around them, offering hay at cost and veterinary services at reduced rates. The rodeo community, initially skeptical of Jake's decision to waste his retirement on a problem bull, had gradually come to understand and respect what he was trying to achieve. Margaret Calhoun from the Calgary Stampede had called the previous week with an unexpected proposition. "Jake, we want Thunder Mountain to be our opening ceremony star next year. Not as a bucking bull, but as an ambassador for the humane treatment of rodeo animals. We're redesigning our entire program around the principles you've demonstrated." Jake had declined politely. Thunder Mountain had given enough of himself to the entertainment industry. Now it was time for him to simply be what he'd always been meant to be, a magnificent creature living freely, respected and loved. As the sun climbed higher, Thunder Mountain wandered toward the small pond at the edge of the property, and Jake followed as he did every morning. The bull would drink slowly, often pausing to look back at Jake with what could only be described as contentment. These quiet moments had become the highlight of Jake's days, proof that healing was possible, that love could triumph over trauma, and that second chances, when offered with genuine compassion, could transform lives in ways that seemed miraculous. Thunder Mountain finished drinking and walked back to Jake, resting his massive head against the old cowboy's shoulder in a gesture that never failed to bring tears to Jake's eyes. Here was forgiveness incarnate, trust rebuilt from ashes, a bond that transcended the boundaries between human and animal. "We made it, didn't we, boy?" Jake whispered, stroking Thunder Mountain's neck. "We both made it home." As if in response, Thunder Mountain let out a soft snort of agreement, his warm breath visible in the cool morning air. In the distance, the peaks of the Canadian Rockies stood sentinel over their small piece of paradise, and Jake Morrison knew that despite everything he'd lost, he'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that love, patience, and respect could overcome any obstacle, heal any wound, and bridge any divide. The greatest victories, he'd learned, weren't won in arenas filled with cheering crowds. They were won in quiet moments like this one, when two souls recognized each other across the vast divide of species and circumstance and chose connection over fear, understanding over dominance, love over everything else. This incredible true story of redemption and second chances shows us that with patience, understanding, and love, even the deepest wounds can heal. If this story has inspired you to believe in the power of compassion, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that celebrate the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals.